This is just a brief message to my masterclass I'm teaching yearly. It's for school credit, and I'm a professor at California Institute of the Arts, Dr. Aaron Sheley. I just recently finished all of my school programming. I'm here doing this masterclass for all my teaching credits that are many to be earned, and it's moving on to year 2, and it's exciting. And we have some new things to teach, and I wanted to give you the lineup of what I'm going to be teaching, because actually I had governed that I'd be somewhere around Film Criticism 3. That I've never been good at the third part of Film Criticism 3 except when deconstructing analytical texts and taking them shot by shot and scene compiled of shots and a sequence compiled of shots and scenes all into this great play of words and intertextuality. We'll talk more about intertextuality this coming semester and how people appropriate things from, in postmodernism, they'll appropriate like a symbol from an old film that'll be in theirs, and it will be like the smoking gun will be like the homage to the film. Like the Maltese Falcon or something will reappear in like some detective movie, and it'll be like, man, you reused the MacGuffin? Well, at least it was a different director. And who knows, it could have been a remake anyway. They'd already remade the Maltese Falcon once from the 30s. And I saw that on Turner Classic Movies. And let me just tell you, if you can't afford the Criterion version of these movies we talk about in Masterclass, and not everyone can afford the Criterion version, which is always the best version and leaves the best standard on there. And I work for Criterion too. This is where this gets really interesting. I can't really get you a discount on Criterion because I sell them max price, because they aren't even given the money that it takes to make individually one of those discs is a lot more expensive than we pay for it. So they're totally worth it. They're cutting edge technology at a reasonable hack down price for us to afford it that otherwise can't. But if you can't afford to rent or see anything, and you can find a lot of it on the internet, movies that you can watch at least on YouTube, where we even have some Criterion set up for other directors that have either asked us to, or we felt the duty and sensibility of those films to be of a Criterion nature. Now, I'm not going to argue for the case of my own films. Criterion hired me as a director. What I wanted to do is write the surmises and write the summaries for films, but they hired me as a director, so I'm trying to turn in these Criterion wanted films, like we did a Dogma 95 film called Lazy Smoker, and it was actually originally a Hollywood film, but we went to Dogma 95 with an edict that we had followed all the rules, and everyone out there was very excited to also allow us to have a movie called Rut that I directed with Matt Klickstein. He's a great friend of mine. I vouch for him in every way. He's won the Pulitzer Prize too, so he's a little new at that feeling, but we're all just kind of stunned that we made it so far in the business, and we've like tons to go, tons of material to go, me and Matt Klickstein. So we bonded on a film when we were both kind of feeling down, and it was called Rut, and once again we followed all of Dogma 95's rules. We actually had rules that were harder to follow than Dogma 95 in ours, but we always made sure to include the Dogma 95 rules in all of our films. When we went to Dark Lord, it does follow, again, Dogma 95, and we didn't print it on that one. We only used the label twice on Rut and Lazy Smoker, because those were the administrations of our total Dogma 95 Serenity 2. So we surrendered Dogma 95. And we're not saying we're as good as those other directors or better. We don't really compare, but we have an art form to make. And I think it's real dodgy, you could say, to say, well, that some of those takes in Lazy Smoker last an hour and nothing happens. But I think if you listen to the soundtrack and things going on around what's happening in this kind of still life picture that's kind of getting wobbly anyway, from the camera kind of coming alive. And again, here I am mixed up talking my own work. Yeah, I'm proud of it, but it's nothing like the greats. I mean, I'm not sitting here saying I can provide you as much entertainment as Greta Garbo or, Fred Astaire and Ginger Rogers are going to give you a lot better time with your evening than Lazy Smoker, yes.
but that you can see a technique in like the avant-garde that I work with, and how it's like blended with kind of this mainstream, and makes me like an odd man out, because I can only get my movies shown in festivals, and then they'll win, and everybody's like, well, shit, did anybody else promote one? And that's a whole other topic, and I'm just telling you where I'm coming from as a professor, because I'm kind of learning this as I teach. But I had required many years of study on these topics, and the next class, anyway, to get down to it, is not going to be Film Criticism 3. It's going to be Film and Philosophy. And mainly we're talking about art and aesthetics and philosophy, or art and philosophy, but there's classical, there's modern, there's formalism, there's realism. So there's all these, those are the four main camps of what an artwork could fall under based on reality. So you have the modern angle being from this kind of like nihilistic, the world's closing in around me, I feel lonely though, and my loneliness is consuming me. That could be one way to approach the loss of classicism to modernity, is speaking of a loss of these sort of codes of classicism now that Aristotle's talking about in his Poetics. Some of the codes of classicism are to make the images in the theater play seem seamless, that they're all one take, even though there are many takes, and that's where you learn to edit invisibly. As a classical editor, you would skew it together as ordinary sequences in the syntagmatique. But we're also going to talk about philosophy and film, about some philosophies and how they work. Like, for instance, when Derrida kind of raises questions of phenomenology, when Derrida talks about phenomenology, a lot of times we're talking about the receptors in our brain accept the receptors in our eyes and show us the picture of what we're seeing in front of us. Now, this is weird because I'm sitting in front of like practically a mirror of myself. It's the wrong angle. Like, whoever chose to go to these straight up vertical angles with actual movies, they do now. And I'm guilty of it too, because I'm using my phone camera, which I have this like really expensive camera over here that I use sometimes for movie shoots. But we use a phone camera because I got it Pokemon updated after beating Pokemon, and now my phone upgraded, so it's like I can get better picture out of here. It's been a go-around with teaching. So far I've been approved by all the schools. Haven't had any complaints from any of the schools since one about 10 years ago that cleared up, I think, in a kind of a rug swept kind of thing. We're all just kind of trying to forget about our mistakes at this point, and we're looking ahead. We can start at this class. You can go back and take the other classes, the criticism classes, and the summer one on special effects. And I thank all those students that joined me through those and actually were crediting me to Coursera and the campuses as a fine teacher. And I thank for your reports. And this is my first year. It was a lot of fun, but I kind of went haphazardly scattershot through no order and sequence of the movies. That will continue a little bit, but after philosophy and film, which I could get into more about, like empiricism, how that creates kind of a totality of subterfuge when you're watching a movie, because the pictures all look like they're stuck together, but it's like they're on this mirror kind of, and it's showing us ourselves if we're in that entertainment position subjectively. And I think that it's not just empiricism, but in phenomenology, there's the exact opposite, which is like, you want to say ontology, right? And ontology is pretty close, but let's just try ontology. Because without being surreal, we can say that at one point, every objective that came into being had an induction on when it became the objective, and that may have been when the whole experimental nature of the utility was used. So the philosophy in film, it's going to be difficult. We're straining with difficult concepts. Even now, I could have conceptualized that whole situation better than I'm trying to say. If the brain isn't writing on the back of the mind, but is writing onto the imagination, like there's epistemology, which is the way we think. So we could be thinking it into existence, or we could be having this experience with our eyes and sounds with our ears. One thing I forgot to mention in special effects class is how good the quality of the cinema has become over the years and ages because of not just the digital movement and not just the beautiful films that have been shot already, and some of them even from the silent era. Intolerance is a beautiful film. And in epistemology, it's like perception and knowledge. It's like, I know that's what that would probably look like, so I'm going to keep that as kind of the suspension of disbelief now, because I know there's really a place that could look like that, even if I'm giving some avant-garde motive to the frame. And that came a lot with like Andy Warhol's movies or Kenneth Anger's movies, where they were using this avant-garde for like a music match imagery type thing, and they both kind of, Andy Warhol kind of let it breathe, and the other films are like these avant-garde staccato type things, you know. Kenneth Anger's doing these kind of American modernity, you know, in a classic way. And one thing that's amazing about Kenneth Anger is that his history stretches back to the Cinematheque in France when Henry Langlois got all the films, ordered films from America. Kenneth Anger was usually the ones ordering the films, because the French, even Jean Renoir and Andre Bazin, were jonesing to see these films from America that they'd heard so much about, and they blew them away. And ever since, the French picked the Americans to be the best filmmakers on earth. And I think it's their ball game. They invented cinema, you know, so if they want to pass the ball to us, we can take it. But I've seen films just as magically made in all countries and good as any others. America seems to have more of the films we watch, even worldwide, because the entertainment is so exaggerated. And we exaggerate things like an expressionism with jagged fences and one lighting. And, you know, we can start to see how the effects of paintings are wearing onto the effects of moving pictures. And, you know, I had this one really weird experience where I was reading like Tale of the Genji or something, not my version, but the original Miyazaki. And I think it was that book where you see these two fish in a little pond, and they're kind of just laying there on top of the water, letting the water bob them up and down. And then it's like talking about how there's like a piece of metal, and I don't think this is in my version of Genji, but it's really interesting how these fish are bouncing in the water, and behind the sun's coming in straight ahead, so it's causing this bright light to go behind the two fish. And if you look right beside the wheel, you'll see a full color picture of the two fish floating, like there's invisibility through it, like you can go through it, but it's a picture of the two fish being reflected off the broken wheel of this cart. It's just kind of sitting there, but the fish are kind of moving, and now the fish are moving, and you see them again up in their reflection. We could easily see this as the beginning of cinema, really in like a primal Mother Nature kind of way. And I know I've heard that before. I'm not taking credit for that speech, because that was either in a really long ago written spiritual book of the Asians. It wasn't really Western, though. That shot didn't seem, but it's been used a couple of times, even as generically as Louis L'Amour. And I'm not saying his genericness is bad. I'm just saying that, like, it may even be in a Louis L'Amour book. It may be even added in to my version of a Stephen King book. I mean, maybe every writer writes that scene, and I didn't want to write it down, so I just expressed it. And then I'll look back to my books, and it's like, it happens 5 times in the first book, you know. They're staring at the reflections of the background lit up fish that are just kind of floating by. And that is what we'll get into in film and philosophy, and different codes, different mentalities, different words. Philosophy for the sake of philosophy, we love that. Even almost more than cinema for the sake of cinema, because cinema has parameters. You still have to get the equipment. You still have to get the equipment to work. You still have to get the equipment to work for what you're trying to do. And then what you're trying to do hopefully transpires in all that precarious equipment. And then you get your shots you need with that setup, and then you go set up elsewhere, and you get through it like a little at a time. Sometimes you can do these rehearse ahead of time ones, or you rehearse ahead of time so much that the film comes out the exact way you had it planned because it was boxed in rehearsal. Like you could be rehearsing a film while you're making it and rehearsing the next scenes like you should, but I've done films where the rehearsal was the shot and it was even better for it. And I wasn't lazy. I was just like, these are non-professional actors. They're regular, normal responses is what I'm looking for. I'm not asking for like the flowery, Gone with the Wind, like European voice of the females. And I'm not saying one is worse than the other. And really, women have the right to define themselves however they want. I'm not going to tell a woman how to define herself if she wants to define herself this way, that way. Everybody should have the freedoms. We don't have to conform. We can. I mean, we have freedom in who we are as we build as our own character. And I believe that in this class, we shall be unbiased. We will take any race, class, or gender. Doesn't offend me. If you run into some rowdies that are my friends that are being that way, well, they're not in college and they're harmless. They're calling their teddy bear like Big Papa anyway. So, like, if their teddy bear is Big Papa, you'll probably be okay. And I had mentioned the strange theory of Grand Junction and its racism. Okay, I'll give this to you again. I'm in this town, Grand Junction, and you know, Trump comes out. People are getting more and more racist because of Trump, a few years ago, and we won't get too into that, but people are getting segregated again, and all this progress we made was getting dumped down, and the report has it, though, that when Trump really started to bring racism back, it even came back a little bit into my town, which pretty much doesn't have problems with anybody of any race. I mean, I've been to some nice clubs around town, and I've seen every race there, and people getting along, and sometimes at clubs they get in fights. Like, this is weird, I'll tell you, because this town I live in is not that populated, really, with any other race, and so you don't have to be a jerk to be a Klansman, because Klansmen I kind of think shouldn't be racist, but I have other reasons for that, because I don't think racism is even real. Like, I think it's an instigated concept. It's total concept through, it's like a trick, it's like a concept art or something. It's like, well, this person's not the way I want them to look, so they'll never please me. They don't mean anything to me. I mean, you could have that legit attitude, but most people here are like, well, I gotta call my friend who's a Klans member, and I'm thinking, well, that's weird. But, like, why would he do that? And then you find out they're all nice guys, and then they're like, well, if I tell my black friends about this, they might not be liking it, but if I tell my black friends, I'll tell my black friends anything I want, just like I'll tell my Klansman friends just anything I want. This is the duties of a professor, to hang us all in there together, to get together, to forget what I was thinking of that I forgot, right? Because that's kind of hard. But we won't carry it on our shoulders to know the exact answers to these films and philosophy classes. If you want to take the class, it's not going to be too hard. Empirical phenomenology and epistemology are going to be brought up as they play out in classic and formal and modern and realistic film. And realism, of course, I'll get to give my great War Trilogy speech, which Dr. Wagner, I did find the War Trilogy. It's fine. It's on Blu-ray. I used it as a cover of one of my Poor White Trash albums. I'm a musician too. Now, don't get too excited about me, because I'm just teaching you things sometimes based on the way it worked when I directed, because I can't really tell that for anyone, even if I was their script supervisor and kept track of all the scenes they filmed. It wouldn't exactly keep track of how they filmed them. And a lot of the times that's the way the director's only knowledge over everybody else is how it was filmed. Because the director knows by looking at the shot, where the camera is placed, what the shot is. Usually in a professional case, they can even take a tape measurement and see where it would end up. The lens would cover it. Now, you've already been here 20 minutes and you're saying this doesn't count for class. Nope, this is just your final reminder to get your finals in. We got several back from last semester doing good. Coursera says it's finding lots of people interested in these classes, but they never fill up. You know, you could have like as many students as you want, going through them at whatever pace they're in. Coursera is keeping track of all the timetables that you need for the classes. This one's optional. I'm going to put that on there, that this is optional. This is only to get you excited for what I'm doing after film and philosophy, because that already took the lead out of my day. I was like, well, we're going into philosophy zone, and we have a lot to talk about when it comes to cinema. Psychology of cinema, politics in cinema. You know, we talked about that in Masterclass, but mainly as a critical tool to unlock the text. Now, in the spring semester, you know, the one that includes March and April, and it'll probably be taught a little bit in February too, because spring starts early, and I don't know how long it's just going to be, but that's beside the point. There'll be about an hour-long classes, just like usual. The lecture's got to be around an hour long, and we had some temporal setbacks with the first batch, but everything's there. All the minutes are logged. Everything's good. The schools like it. You know, Harvard was just saying we haven't had any problems. Not any with your class, which is weird because usually a class like this gets booted and bumped. USC likes it because it's a viral class and everybody's on it and looking at it. So USC, of course, is going to let us teach there. And Calarts was originally where I applied to be a professor. And, you know, there were times in my Calarts experience that I didn't think I was going to finish. And even with a master's. And there was times I was thinking I wasn't even going to get through it. There's times I was homeless all over the earth. You know, too drunk to do my homework. But those are just challenges that arise in the grand dream of how long it's going to take to get a PhD. Anyway, and then I went for Calarts. I had to have subsidized schools that I had to go through programs with too. That's how I got my Harvard degree, and they were absolutely up for Calarts Battle Royale. And I've done other school tracks too, followed them to the letter to their academic report, and then just making up time as a teacher, because you got to look at I was mentioning earlier in Masterclass, I have a cousin, Dr. Jason Sheley, and he's much wiser and he's much more coherent, and he's not always stoned like I am, you know. No, but he's like, talk about fact checking and changing lyrics around. I mean, he's in the Aristotelian society, which he brought back. I respect him because he could do a Masterclass almost better because he could teach from what he knows. And you know why? Because this is my second year. I'm still a noob. Jason, this is like his 7th year, 8th year. He's probably just saying 7th to make me feel better, but probably has 9 years of school already down, tucked away in his briefcase. Yeah, and that's about the only thing jealous I am of him now. No, there's other things I'm jealous of him as. I'm totally won't get into it, but anyway, I appreciate that he's been teaching so long, because it's something to look forward to. Because if he can do it that long, then it just gives me the hot step and a jump right where I need to be, riding his wake. I'm riding his wake. Like, he's driving the boat, and I'm back here with the microphone saying, this is what we found out in philosophy really means. This is what Jason read in philosophy last night and had to share with me over brainwaves. You know, and I think giving this test between classes is going to conclude here. We're not a real stress test, but who likes the idea of spring semester being taught over 10 films only? We might bring some outside examples in. And, you know, we will have classes on other directors, so fear not that I know nobody's going to take the D.W. Griffith course I teach next year, and I'm putting that off for one more year, so my diehard fans will be still with me on part 3. But I had all the movies for it. I've talked about it all. I've talked a little bit about it in Series 1 that I am doing, with permission, by the way, a Quentin Tarantino class here on Masterclass. Isn't that going to be freaking exciting? Never, like, the show is so clipless and I have rights to footage, but I don't like teaching and going to clips at the same time, because then a lot of technical difficulties could arise. That's the kind of technology we deal with Coursera. But look at how sharp my phone records, because you can see that, like, there's something about it that there's game-like Pokemon edges in this. And it was all because I configured my camera into the Pokemon setup that I downloaded when I beat the game in one of my movies. And now here's the thing. I just talked about my movie again. In Tarantino class, we will be taking no references to my movies. We're only doing Tarantino. We might compare him to other directors like Tim Burton and Terry Gilliam, which we had considered for the class. And we can talk about their movies too, but only as they're kind of in the era of independent but big budget cinema, nonconformity. And we'll tell the Tarantino story. We'll tell about the Tarantino channel, which was cool when he was young and he was trying to get the money for Reservoir Dogs, and he had that show and, like, offline cable, and living in Hollywood, getting busted for weed after Pulp Fiction, having to go homeless. They actually probably had to eat Roger Avery to survive that Christmas. No, I'm kidding. They didn't eat Roger Avery. He's sitting right next to me. He's co-writing this whole speech. No. Anyway, we're going to get into the Tarantino and the cinema of the cool, the cinema of the... It is existential, Tarantino. He's not always given that. It's postmodern, though. And I don't think there's really metaphysics in either. That it's like an abstract form of taking pictures of pictures taken in another context and recontextualized. Intertextualized is that, like, Tarantino has, like, 5 clues to another movie in one picture. Like, when you see Uma Thurman wearing her hair a certain way, it's a throwback to My Life to Live by Godard. And there's so many things about it that you can learn about the trivia of film, and suddenly it becomes the production. The trivia is the production, because now you're going, we've got to remember how this scene happened in Hollywood time. It's like when Steven Spielberg directed Close Encounters and he was taking notes on Hollywood films and his favorite shot of every film. He'd use that in the way he set up his shot. And that seems random, but taking the biggest shot is making this spaceship movie look bigger and look wilder. And man, that spaceship looked like more fun than the one from 2001 Space Odyssey, where you have to exercise all the time. I'd be like one of those Wall-E dudes with, like, the background thing and just, like, lay on my floating tablet bench or whatever. So we've done it. We've made it all the way through. We're processed. They like us as filmmakers. I'm doing more work for the Writers Guild. Kind of going on like a #1 position, but don't say it too loudly, because they already had to excommunicate 3 writers that didn't like me, but they were all my pseudonyms. No, I'm kidding. I don't really do that. I had some ghostwriting, but we won't go into that. And then, last thing I want to tell you is, don't forget Tarantino doesn't start till spring, and we all have to suffer through 1,000,000 miles of philosophy. Not 1,000,000 miles, just like, well, then, if it's Immanuel Kant, then yeah, it's 1,000,000 miles to anywhere. But if it's Martin Heidegger, we're gone in 60 seconds. So, it looks like in about 60 seconds I'm going to hang up on this picture and I'll have this 30-minute talk we just had. And I'm glad we had our little talk. To Calarts, USC, and Coursera with Harvard. Enjoy the rest of your break. I'll see you July 27th for the full Monty.